With Hugo's sheer dominance over the midfield and the game in general, Isagi's ego and adaptability roar in excitement and defiance. He can't help himself but feel the heat emanating from the field. And now with Baro and Shido joining the game, this new environment will grant the Demon King the ultimate freedom he desires in order to evolve. And that's precisely what we are going to explore today. Isagi's next big evolution and how it relates to Hugo and his philosophy, but more specifically how it relates to his new vision. However, before we actually explore this, I gotta give a huge shout out to a friend of the channel that goes by the name of Conan over on Discord, because he was the one who helped me put this theory together. And for any of you guys who have wonderful ideas and would like to see them in videos like this, feel free to join my Discord server and DM me directly. However, with this out of the way, let's jump right in. And the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that an evolution is due with Isagi. Not just because Hugo completely dismantled his previous playing style, but also we've seen all the players that matter get an evolution in this or the previous game. Of course, we've all seen Karasu's new broken playing style, and we've seen how Rin learned how to tame his berserker state. Granted, both evolutions are not complete at the moment, but that's besides the point. And I am actually suspecting that either Baro or Shido would get an evolution in the second half. And so of course the main character of the show could not fall behind, otherwise what the hell we are doing right now. However, I gotta say that the evolution doesn't necessarily need to happen in this game. But for the very least, the seeds for it need to be planted right now. And I feel like Ego already set the stage for this by completely taking the leadership out of Isagi's hands and instead giving him the ultimate freedom he desires in order to evolve. After all, if you remember, the way Isagi acquired his strongest weapon to date, Metavision, was by simply living in Kaiser's shadow and living in the freedom that Kaiser presented through his sheer dominance over mankind. And so right now, and this is a hint to his new playing style, Isagi will thrive in the shadow of Rin, Shido and Baro. And I feel like after acquiring the seeds for this new playing style in this game, and acquiring a certain weapon that would enable that playing style in the first place, Isagi will spend most of the U20 World Cups mastering this new style. I feel like at the end of this game he would acquire a new weapon, and he would master it completely in the England game. From there he would embrace this new playing style and master it throughout the next few games until his face-off against Kaiser in the quarterfinals, because to me that's perfect writing right there. Kaiser and Ness would perfect their new playing style and Isagi would perfect his, and they clash their new playing styles in the quarterfinals. However, before we actually explore what this new playing style is, let's actually talk about Hugo. Let's talk about Hugo's role in this matter. And specifically, let's talk about the role of his new vision, which as you all know at this point, this is not Metavision. What Hugo activated before shooting is without a doubt not Metavision, simply because it doesn't make sense to activate it at the last moment. Metavision is about controlling the field, and so if Hugo were to use it, he would have activated it much earlier. And so, if it's not Metavision, what is this new vision Hugo presented? Well, you see, the design is way too similar to what Charles used in the PXG game. And if you remember, everyone said at first that that's Charles' Metavision, but I was the only YouTuber at the time who called that this is not Metavision, and in fact this is a new vision. And then everything got confirmed when we saw Charles use Metavision, and he had the typical radar design for it. And so my theory came true. And guys, if you want to explore these eyes in depth, I highly recommend you watch this video made by me exploring what this new vision about Charles is all about. However, for the sake of this video, I will reiterate every Hugo relevant information we have on these eyes, starting of course with what we should call them. Well, I personally call them the sniper eyes, and the reasoning is actually simple, because what these eyes do is that they help the midfielder pick or snipe a perfect route from a plethora of options he has. And if you think about it, this would actually explain how Hugo's passes are insane despite them being relatively weak and look as if they are easy to intercept. Because you see, with these eyes, Hugo simply snipes the path with least resistance on the field, making stopping his passes rather challenging for almost anyone, even if they present Metavision, like we've seen it happen with Hiyori and Reo. Which honestly, for the sake of Isagi's new evolution, this matters a lot, because just from saying this, I feel like they are the complete opposite of the Predator eyes. Not just because they are their counterparts for Freedom type players, but also it seems that these eyes elevate the passing ability, whereas the Predator Predator eyes require an insane shooting ability to function in the first place. And so I really find this to be really interesting. However, what if a player that has these eyes actually presents an insane passing ability? Well, the results are actually outwardly. You get size level of insane passing ability. Or to put it in different words, you get midfielders who in total chaos can calmly pick or snipe the perfect pass like we've seen it again with Sai and of course with Charles. However, what actually matters more for us today is actually another key detail regarding these eyes, which is something that Hugo has shown us, because these eyes are not just about passing or even shooting for the case of Hugo. They actually open up a whole different way of looking at the field, exactly how we've seen Rin, Kaiser and Baro utilize the Predator eyes not just in terms of shooting and scoring. However, I really don't want to delve into this yet, and we should leave it later when we explore Isagi's new playing style. For now, you can already tell that the explanation I gave you guys reveals so much about these eyes. First, as I said, they seem to be the counterpart to the Predator eyes, and they seem to be strictly for freedom type players. I mean, the idea of choosing a great option among a plethora of options already signals this, but actually I am also suspecting that these eyes help the player in seeing the options in the first place, meaning they help feeding him more freedom. However, that's not all, because much like the Predator eyes, they also allow the player to instantly know what the best route to take is. Instead of just wasting time analyzing the options, the player can instantly know what the best option is and he can instantly go for it. And this honestly is rather deadly, especially at the hands of insane freedom type players like Sai and Charles. However, and more importantly, they actually help to even the odds against restriction players because, as I said in their matchups, restriction players are completely ahead of freedom type players, and one of the main reasons for that is the fact that restriction players have the Predator eyes. I mean, think about it, the ability to instantly pierce through any situation you are in and taking everyone by surprise because no one can see the path your eyes are hunting gave restriction players a massive edge over freedom type. However, if these eyes are what I am describing them, then they are by definition a game changer. Because think about it, in addition to the elevated accuracy and the ability to see clearly more options, these eyes also make it very hard for restriction to be applied onto the player, since he can visualize routes no one else can see. And if you know anything, applying restriction to freedom type is the kryptonite for those players. And so again, by definition, this weapon is a game changer. But more importantly, through immediately knowing what's the best option, the player becomes very slippery and hard to contain. The moment he has the ball, he has already explored his option and is already on the move, kinda like how Sai was in the U20 game and how Hugo owned Japan in chapter 338, because while everyone was trying to read what options he will go for, Hugo was already shooting, taking everyone including Agamaru's instincts by surprise. However, for me, this actually presents a huge issue. I mean, I just said that these eyes are all about freedom, and so why does Hugo, one of the strongest restriction players, have them? Well, the simple answer is, I was mistaken when it comes to Hugo. And here I actually gotta give another shout out to another friend of the channel who actually helped me see things more clearly, not just with Hugo but also with Snuffy. And so once more, thank you Ichigo Kurosaki. You see, being restrictive means that you thrive in restriction. It doesn't mean that you cast restriction when you play. Which, I know it sounds similar, but think about it this way. A restrictive player can actually create freedom by his playing style, and these mainly tend to be chaotic players. Think about how Kaiser and Baro always gave Isagi freedom, because you see they break systems and create chaos, and so their mere presence give a lot of freedom to other players. On the other hand, we have players like Snuffy, who is definitely freedom type, but he creates restriction through his system and designs that force players into specified positions. And I really think that Hugo falls under the same category. Just because he casts the strongest restriction we have seen in the show, it doesn't necessarily mean he is restrictive, as he himself could thrive in freedom, and his playing style is all about turning that freedom into restriction for other players, which actually makes sense and explains why Loki and Charles were giving him a plethora of options. not only so they can confuse the Japanese team, but also because they understand that's where Hugo thrives, and him presenting the sniper eyes all but confirms this, because in an instant Hugo was able to look at all the options he had and deducted that Japan and especially Karasu were too focused on Loki and Charles, and thus the best option was to shoot. And much like it was with Charles and Sai, he was the only one who was able to see that thanks to his eyes. But I know these eyes are insane and whatnot. The real question that poses itself, how does all of this relate to Isagi and his new evolution? Well, you see, what me and Conan deducted is that Isagi will actually evolve after two requirements are met, the first of which is his philosophy. As of chapter 339, it became obvious that Hugo's mentality has merit. Even if Ego slander it to eternity, Hugo makes so much sense. In fact, Ego said all of that only for him to place Isagi as a cam exactly like Hugo wanted. However, believe me guys when I tell you, that was the correct choice. Not because Isagi fits better as a midfielder, but rather because he can have far more options from that position. Because you see, and this is the big one, by having Rin, Baro and Shido be in the spotlight, Isagi can become a shadow striker. And what this new playing style is all about is a deadlier, far more unpredictable version of the Demon King. Instead of having teams build strategies to contain him, Isagi will control the field from the shadows, exactly how Hugo is right now. By having Loki be the focal point, Hugo is able to completely own everyone on the field. However, instead of doing it as a defensive midfielder, Isagi will be doing it as a striker. And to give you guys a visualization of how that would look, think about Baro after the second selection and up until he joined Ubers. Once teams stopped revolving around him, Baro was able to embrace living in the shadows, and he became the most unpredictable player in the entirety of the show. And I truly believe Isagi will be the same. However, instead of doing it in a villainish way like Baro by hunting his teammates, Isagi will actually be more like Hugo, and he will elevate his teammates with him. And before we explore how will this look, let's actually explain why this makes so much sense. Think about Isagi's success in the NEL. Let's face it here, it's all thanks to Kaiser. All the success that Isagi achieved always came when Kaiser was the focal point. Think about it this way, he used Yuki and Noah to sneak from the shadows in the Manshine City game. He even did it to Chris Prince here. Then in the next game, Ubers put their best guy on Kaiser, which gave Isagi the freedom he desires. And finally in the PXG game, if you remember the last goal, because Ness had the ball, Shido and Rin were completely focused on Kaiser, allowing Isagi to slip by. And I understand he moved before everyone because of the fastest piece, but it also helped that they were unable to take Kaiser out of their heads because Ness had the ball. And even before the NEL, Isagi scored his most impressive goals when he was in the shadows of other insane strikers. He did it in the U20 game with Rin against Sai, he did it in the third selection with Shido and Rin, and of course he did it multiple times in the second selection with Baro and Nagi. In fact, even in the first selection, he was able to utilize both Kunigami and Chigiri in order to get himself completely free and always score from the shadows. And so I truly believe Hugo is completely correct. Isagi has to play as the second best, and this does not mean that he plays as a midfielder, rather he plays in the shadows. However, this is great and all, but how would Isagi rationally achieve this new playing style? Well, this is where the sniper eyes come to play. But hold on a second, Ace, didn't you just say that the sniper eyes are meant for midfielders and Isagi needs to become a shadow striker? Well, you see, that's actually true. They shine with midfielders, especially with insane passing ability. However, much like how Metavision could be used with strikers, midfielders and even defenders, the sniper eyes by their nature are very malleable and could be used by both midfielders and strikers. In fact, they could even be used by defenders like we've seen it happen with Charles and Hugo. But for the sake of the video, let's actually focus on how the sniper eyes could be used both for playmaking and for striking. Because I truly believe Isagi will not use these eyes just as a striker but also as a playmaker, by actually controlling the field from the shadow thanks to these eyes. And in fact, Isagi actually used these eyes before subconsciously. The first time happened back in the second selection. And before anyone say that that's way too old, you have to remember Isagi used Metavision in the first game of Blue Lock against Baro, and so it wouldn't honestly surprise me that the seeds for the sniper eyes were planted back in the second selection. Because you see, in the 3 vs 3 game against Kunigami, Ryo, and Chigiri, Isagi was able to visualize the infinite options Nagi was presenting, and at the same time he was able to see how Baro's path is completely dead, all in an instant, all from one glance. Sure, Isagi did not act upon that visualization immediately, and I feel like that's because he was using the eyes subconsciously, but the fact remains that he was able to see all of those options just from one glance. And to be honest, this is rather OP for it to be just a regular feat. He has to have used these eyes. Then the second time Isagi used these eyes was in the Manshine City game, and once more Isagi here used them subconsciously. There he took one glance at the field and he understood that he can't do anything right now, because his physique cannot keep up with his metavision and everything he can see. However, the moment Noah joined him, Isagi once more in an instant was able to see all the near infinite options playing next to Noah was presenting. But again, because he was doing this subconsciously, he once more was not able to deduct which one is best, until of course Noah told him that he has to discard the noise and focus only on the path that gives him the best results. And then of course Isagi was able to focus on the path that would destroy Kaiser and Yuki at the same time. And there Isagi gave us one of the best playmaking scenes we've seen in the show. And of course, if you remember, Isagi himself ended up not scoring, because the most rational option was not to shoot for himself, but rather pass to Yuki. And as you all know, Isagi has no option doing this if it means that he could score the next time. And so this small interaction right here would be at the core of his new playing style. And thus let's explore exactly how would that look. How would this new playing style look on an actual field? You see, as I said, by utilizing the light that Shido, Baro, and Rin are throwing, Isagi can thrive from the shadow by being the beating heart of the attack. And this is possible, of course, due to his metavision, his off-the-ball movements, and the sniper eyes. Because as we've seen it from Hugo, Isagi would be able to deduct what's the best course of action to take in an instant. There he would utilize his metavision and his superior off-the-ball movements to position himself in the perfect, most optimal spot, not just so he can score, but also so he can deliver passes. Because again, with the sniper eyes, he would be able to see the best option to take once he receives the ball in the most optimal spot. From there he could link up with Shido and completely destroy the defense with a no connection pass, or he could utilize Rin's superior dueling ability and give him a pass in a position no one could challenge Rin one-on-one, and thus he would be able to score. Or much like we've seen it in the second selection, he would push Baro to break the system completely and score the most unexpected goal in the game. And finally, in the option with the highest percentage is Isagi going for his own goal, whether be it with a quick 1-2 or with a direct shot. Regardless of how he achieves it, Isagi will be able to see all of these options at once, and he would be able to deduct immediately what's the best option to take given the situation he finds himself in. Because if shooting is not an option, especially if Hugo or Charles are on him, he could, as I said, deliver a pass to Shido or Rin, or utilize Baro's insane unpredictability to break Hugo's system completely. However, if Loki, for example, is on Ren and Charles is covering Shido's option with Hugo being on Baro, Isagi could take the lead himself and score. And I truly believe this would make Isagi near impossible to stop, because unlike what happened against Hugo at the beginning of the game, where the latter completely swallowed him, what would you do against an Isagi like this? He would present a near infinite option for every player that he plays with, that applying a strong restriction on him is near impossible. Granted, if anyone would be able to do it, it's obviously has to be Hugo, because with his sniper eyes he could actually anticipate what Isagi is aiming for. However, it also would require that Hugo utilizes his teammates in order to neutralize all the options Isagi has. And if stopping Isagi would require to push the strongest team in the competition this much, is a testament to how deadly this new playing style is. And also because Isagi would be going for his goal all the times, and he would only take the other options when his path to the goal is blocked, I feel like he can still pursue being the best striker, because he would be as deadly as ever, but this time he would be much harder to stop. However, that's the theory for you guys. Please let me know in the comments what do you think, and until next time, thank you for watching.